What's up, guys? Welcome to another Fantasy Fellowship Author Q&A. I'm Damian, and I'm thrilled to be interviewing Ethan, otherwise known as EJ Doble, as part of the Fantasy Fellowship Indie Spotlight Initiative. Today, we're going to be discussing Ethan's debut book, The Fangs of War, the first entry of Ethan's planned The Blood and Steel saga. The Fangs of War is a grim-dark high fantasy set in a world where a perilous war has broken out between two nations after the execution of one of the nation's kings, resulting in that nation falling under martial law as the military seized command of the state. As a host of despicable, venomous characters lead a bloody crusade, the story's very few benevolent characters swept up in the chaos, facing insurmountable odds. So, yeah, like I was saying earlier, Ethan, this first come up on my Bookstagram a few months ago, and I see a few guys like Bookish Austin talking about it, and I thought, yeah, you know, I had very similar taste to the guy. So when he started bigging it up like he was, I thought I'm going to need to check this out. And read it a couple months ago, absolutely fell in love with it. Beautiful prose, fantastic characters, absolutely fantastic characters. And as soon as we started this initiative for the Fantasy Fellowship, I was very forthright in this book needs to get a spot, and I was very vocal about that as well. And once I convinced enough people and everyone else in the Discord and part of the Indie Initiative started reading it, they absolutely fell in love with the book. Yeah, so just talk me through the concept of Fangs of War. How did you come up with the idea? What inspired you?
Well, first of all, massive appreciation to you for, shoehorning the Fangs of War into all this and getting my name out there. I do really appreciate that. And the response from the Fantasy Fellowship and from the wider book community on Instagram and Twitter and that has been really, really nice to see. As for the book itself, the Fangs of War actually started as a failed English writing project when I was about 14, 15.
Yeah.
And it was only the prologue, and it was a mysterious figure kills someone on a shoreline, and it sets off a chain of events that are alluded to, and that's where it ends. And I remember my English teacher at the time looking at me and going, "It's a bit too descriptive. I'm not sure if it's going to fit your right audience." I completely ignored her.
Yeah.
And it was rewritten a few times, but from that first chapter, I then decided, okay, let's say the king was ruler of a city, and that city had been attacked, and it was an old enemy, and people don't like it, but some people don't like it more than others. And then I just pictured a harbour side. I pictured a woman standing on a harbour side, and then suddenly chapter 1 was born, Kavara was born, Ravek was born, and it all streamlined out of that. As for the actual book itself and the concept and the characters and everything else, there was no pre-plan.
Yeah. It's yeah, because I've especially me, but everyone else that read the book, the prologue with the king's execution instantly drew us all in, and it's so thematic. Like you said, he's someone standing on the shore. There's a mysterious sort of possibly magical figure with him, and yeah, it set the scene instantly. It was bloody, it was mysterious, and yeah, it was an explosive start. Absolutely fantastic. And that's the thing with the Fangs of War as well. You've got the you have it's majorly political, and the interpersonal relationships between the different nations, and their history of violence and bloodshed between them. But you do have that sort of magic cooking in the background, don't you? And these mythological characters brewing in the background, the Iron Queen, the Forgotten One. And whilst they're not a massive part of the book, massive part of the story, overtly, they are there in the background. They are sort of pulling the strings and dictating what goes on. Can you tell us a bit more about the mythology of the Fangs of War?
The mythology is based around the entirety of the world known as the Icebreaker Sea. I I'm not really sure how much I would call it a magic system. I think you hit the nail on the head when you say like mythology, because everything is supposedly controlled, and it's revealed in the book that it is controlled by a godlike being called the All Mother,
yeah.
Who uses the mothers of the four main realms of the Icebreaker Sea as her conduits to almost guide and control the fate of, humans and all the different people who live around around the sea. The mothers they're shadows, they're figments, they're not really real, but they all conduct their business within something called the Rapture. And the Rapture is almost like a mirror realm, where things are they're physical, and they are, there's still sensory elements, there's still all of that stuff, but it's very much, well, it's black and white. It's a void. It's like walking into a cloud, and that is the realm that Kavara discovers throughout the book, that the Iron Queen dips her toes into as well, and discovers herself. And although it's mainly alluded to, and you kind of discover it as the book goes on, with the big reveal coming at the end of what that all means, I can assure that as the series goes on, it kind of does develop its own magic system, which is not actually something I've written before. So Horns of Grief is very much almost like a trial run for, can I actually write a magic system?
So we're going to see more of that in the Horns of Grief, more of the mythology of the Icebreaker Sea, more of the the magic system. Is that going to play more of a prevalent role than it did in the Fangs of War? Because the Fangs of War, as we both said, is very military, very political, with the magic in the background. So is Horns of Grief going to feature like a major shift towards the mythology side?
I wouldn't necessarily say major. That would come later on, and there are, again, even bigger plans going on in the future installments for that kind of thing. But Kavara's story takes more of a magic-based element, because she discovers what it means to experience the visions that she has, to have the powers that she has supposedly embodied. And in the Horns of Grief, we learn why she's embodied those, how it then affects her, and that there are different things that she can do that she didn't realize she could do.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave the words shadow step, for everyone to theorize about. But that's one of the big ones. That's one of the ones that she is most keen to try and understand.
Yeah, sounds quite cool. I've got a few rough ideas of what shadow step could possibly mean, especially going off of how the last book ended as well. I just want to touch on what you said earlier with you saying that initially the Fangs of War initially started as an English writing project. Is one of the things that I and many others, that we're most astounded about, is you wrote this book so young. Like you're what, 20, 21 years old now at the moment?
I am 21 at the end of this month.
21 at the end of this month.
Probably about the time this video goes out, I'll be 21. Yeah.
Nice, and that's what I mean. The concept is so mature. The writing style, the prose is very lyrical, very fancy, very nice, and I just think it's so impressive that at your age that you've wrote a book of this intelligence and magnitude. It's really, really thoroughly impressive. And I'd like to know a bit about what sort of books or TV shows or films or whatever sort of inspired your thought process with your writing and the Fangs of War. For me anyway, when I was reading the Fangs of War, I got some heavy, The Witcher vibes, especially with the monsters and how grim and how bleak the world was. And it sort of felt like, to me, maybe it's a bit of it's like a combination of elements from The Witcher, Joe Abercrombie's First Law series, and George Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. That's the sort of amalgamation of story and characters that I got. So tell me a bit about that.
I'd say that's a good base point. I will admit I am probably one of the 0.5% of the population who has not actually properly watched Game of Thrones or read Game of Thrones in any capacity.
Wow.
And that's purely because I haven't got round to it. It's not a case of, I'm actively trying to avoid it, because I'm not. I do want to get around to watching it at some point. Absolutely The Witcher. I haven't read the books, but I did watch the first season. Henry Cavill was just an embodiment of a morally ambiguous character, and that certainly stuck with me. But I got a lot of my inspiration from very random sources. One of the main ones is Joe Abercrombie. I think at the time that I started doing some of the initial work for the book, I just finished reading Best Served Cold, which, in my opinion, is one of the best books written in the fantasy genre. If you want a story of revenge, and that's where I get a lot of my motifs from, that's your go-to book. And probably the other one would be Adrian Tchaikovsky and The Shadows of the Apt. The whole link between certain people, certain powers, certain societal structures, that reflect how people respond to things. Obviously in that one you've got Kindon, people who are like part bug, part insect and stuff. Obviously I didn't go to that extent, but I wanted to give each world and each people within the Icebreaker Sea its own unique society, its own unique way of living and doing things. And a lot of that does come from Tchaikovsky, and he is my favorite author. He has been for years and years. And yeah, that's probably my main influences. And when I was younger, I obviously read Lord of the Rings, a lot of Christopher Paolini. As I've got a bit older, I've also enjoyed John Gwynne and Marcus Heitz and a few others. But no, yeah, there's a lot of influence going into it. But yeah, it's Tchaikovsky has my heart in that case.
Yeah, we recently had Tchaikovsky for our Fantasy Fellowship convention earlier, 3 months ago in September, and he was an absolute joy and wealth of knowledge to speak to and to learn from that. Sit under that learning tree. Hopefully, we can get him back for next year. But
definitely, definitely.
You mentioned Abercrombie as well. I did really enjoy. I've only read The Blade itself, and I do plan to get to the rest of his books. But I did really enjoy The Blade itself, but like one of the main criticisms I see of The Blade itself is it's very, very, very character driven with not a lot of plot movement.
Yeah.
Whereas, I hope I'm not going to offend any Abercrombie super fans here, but from my perspective anyway, I feel like he perfected on what he done. Like, because Fangs of War, it's very character driven. It really heavily focuses on the characters, their motivations, their relationships with each other, what drives them, what affects them. But with the Fangs of War, with your Fangs of War, it's got that plot lurching forward. It's very much moving towards a certain point. It's got the Iron Queen shifting in the background. It's got the All Mother planning whatever she's planning in the background, and it's just more praise I have for the Fangs of War is that the Blade itself obviously is an iconic book, but from my perspective, like I said, I hope I don't wind up any Abercrombie superfans here, but you've really reiterated and sort of, from my perspective, perfected what he set out to do with the Blade itself, and that's what I wish I got from the Blade itself, was more of what you've achieved with the Fangs of War.
I always wanted to make it very, very layered, and although the world itself developed from a few very separate, very unique ideas, I did want to have the mythological element, the idea that there is a history and there are, the war that's being fought is not just one that's, just appeared out of nowhere. You know, there was a war before, and then things have gone bad, and then other things have happened to then stem to the point that we're at now. And then also to make sure the characters, when they go off and do their own separate thing, because obviously the Fangs of War is very much POVs going in completely different directions.
It definitely is.
I wanted to make sure every character was grounded in a world that felt real. And I think the primary way that I encouraged that was telling a story through the landscape rather than telling the story through character interactions. It's almost like I will set the scene and then stick the characters in, and then they unravel the world from there, rather than it being an exploration of them all the time, and then the world around them feels quite flat and one-dimensional.
That's definitely a vibe I got as well. Like, for example, you see when Kavera goes over the sea to the city of Savico, and she interacts with the citizens there. It's very you see how they live their life, and then you see with Revik going north to Raz.
Through the lowlands, yeah.
As he passes through all the different villages and he commits all these atrocities, and you see it with Jinx and a sort of band of misfits and criminals in the underworld of Cassandra, and and it's not just, that's what I love about it. It's not just character driven. You get this amazing world building. You get all these different plot points coming together, and it sets the scene very well, as opposed to you're just exploring characters and nothing else. And I absolutely love that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad that's come across, because that was something that I did really, really want to drive home. Was that it's not just a book, it's not just the people in it, it's everything about the story that's being told.
100% agree. Touch on the mythology again, because there's one character that in particular that I was very intrigued by whilst reading the Fangs of War, and I still feel like I don't know much about this character, is the Older Bane. And the Older Bane, what's the deal with the Older Bane? Like I thought they were fascinating, but I didn't understand. Like they rule this city through fear and dictatorship for the most part, but they're very, even though they're very hostile to Kavara, they're sort of accommodating at the same time.
Yeah.
And, I just want to know, like, where like the Older Bane's like powers extend. Like, what do they represent? Like, are they magical in themselves? The Older Bane, is it just purely a political title?
So the Elder Bane is he doesn't necessarily possess any powers as such, not any particular magical connection, but there's a mystery around him, and there's a strangeness around him that draws people in, and then makes them bend the knee and listen to them and try and toe the line, basically. The Elder Bane was a character with an unusual past, who basically walked down from the mountain one day and appeared at the city gates, and through sheer fear alone of whatever they were, let them in. And the soldiers then came to them and bowed knee and begged for forgiveness, not knowing what they'd done wrong, but feeling like this was some curse that had been set on them. And then they basically got a band together, took over the city, sent the kin into exile against the propaganda of other places, and then ruled with an iron hand for however many years afterwards. But the Elder Bane is always incredibly wary of outsiders, as Kavara's treatment shows. But that's also because, I think it's alluded once in the Fangs of War, that Provenci, back just after the collapse, when Provenci basically was in its golden age, actually set sail to the City of the Sun and attempted to overthrow it. And so the Elder Bane is very much cautious of anyone coming in, fearing they're a spy, fearing that there's more plots in the midst to take their power from them. But the reason why the Alderbane is so accommodating of Kavara is because they don't know what she's capable of. They don't know. They sense that there is a power there within Kavara. They sense that it's a bigger story than what's being said. But they don't know the extent of that. So rather than and it's something that's really, really brought into the foreground in the Haunts of Grief is this power dynamic of you're here because I let you be here, but I also don't want you to go anywhere because I don't know what you're capable of, and I don't know if it's going to come back and cause me trouble in the future. They are very, well, I wouldn't say paranoid, but cautious is probably the best word.
Definitely. Yeah, another thing with the Alderbane that I loved was the sort of the aesthetic attire to the Alderbane. And to touch on The Witcher again, it gave me, I don't know if you recall the Veshins from the Witcher.
Yes.
Yeah, the Alderbane gave me heavy Veshin vibes, very like druidic in how it looked.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
yeah, and I thought that was wicked. Absolutely, really cool visual. They've really contrasted for me as well, because the impression that I got from all the different nations was, say, provincially was sort of European, maybe possibly like Mediterranean, Italian inspired.
Yeah.
And then you have over the other side of the Icebreaker Sea, Civica. I always got the vibe, the city of light, is it? I believe.
City of the Sun.
City of the Sun. I always got the impression it was very like Arabian, Arabic inspired. And then to have like the Alderbane there, who seemed like this very like kind of even Slavic in terms of its aesthetic.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a really cool contrast.
The Alderbane had a couple of reference points to them when I was developing them. A lot of the Witcher stuff, definitely. The game series Dark Souls definitely came into the mix, and No Face from Spirited Away.
Yeah. That's an interesting one. Yeah.
It's almost like a spirit, a presence that can be both incredibly dangerous and harmful, but can also be tempered and also quite meek and cautious and stuff. Yeah. And it was just that whole, it was just that kind of shift between them that gave me a lot of the idea for the Alderbane, and then to give them the frightening intensity of something you would find in The Witcher or Dark Souls or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's a really cool comparison there to use No Face from Spirited Away. That's never something I would have actually considered myself. It actually changes like how I perceive the Alderbane. That's actually quite a cool.
You get a lot more of him in the sequel. So,
yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, because, like I said, it's a character that really, really intrigues me, and I can't wait to know more about him. We've mentioned the actual the world of the Icebreaker Sea, but the actual sea itself, the Icebreaker Sea, because for a while it's obviously known as the world of the Icebreaker Sea, but we see over the course of the Fangs of War, we actually see very little of the actual sea itself. So I was just wondering, is there more intended to do with the actual sea itself going forward in the series, like possibly creatures that come from the sea, maybe some sort of lost civilization, naval battles between the nations at war, possibly?
There might be a few things in the pipeline going forward. Let's just say one of the books in the series has quite a lot of naval combat involved, and we see ships, and we see sea dragons, and we see all sorts, and I'm very excited. I'm definitely looking forward to that.
Sea dragons as well.
Yes.
Sea dragons, that's going to be wicked. Yeah, I like the concept of a sea dragon. That sounds really wicked. Very cool. Very cool. I don't really delve too much into spoilers here, but one of the main talking points on the Fantasy Fellowship Discord was the dynamic and the relationship between Marcus and Samantha. And without going into spoilers, it's a very tragic relationship and a very heartbreaking relationship.
I have people who have still not forgiven me for their whole dynamic.
Yeah, you've got a lot of people aren't happy on the Fantasy Fellowship about that as well. And yeah, without getting into spoilers too much, like talk me through their dynamic, their relationship, because especially with, like I said, without getting into spoilers too much, with what goes down in their climax in the book in terms of the arena, there's a lot of different ways that our members saw that going. Like, and what like had you originally planned for it to always go that way between them two, or did you change your course of action with them over the course of the series, over the course of the writing the book?
Well, first off, I'll give a little insight into my path to actually getting the book to a published product. The summer before it was published, back in 2020, I think. No, 2021. I sent out a couple of queries to traditional publishing agents and stuff like that. And they actually told me to cut Savanta and Marcus's story because it was unnecessary for the plot line.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
that's shocking.
Whichever agent said that, as I went through them, I just thought, I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you, because of any of the characters, I would have sooner dropped Kavara's story than I would have dropped Savanta and Marcus, because they are some of the favorite characters that I've written.
I'd agree. I'd agree with you.
It was, their story was always going to be that Savanta encountered tragedy and she had everything taken away from her, and her story is one of unhealed trauma that then dictates where her life goes after that, and that Marcus is almost the caring, doting friend who wants to follow and wants to help, but is also there trying to say, you know, this is bad, we shouldn't be doing this. You know, walking into Taraz, encountering, you know, Kazbak hounds and, you know, Tarazi scouts and stuff, and everything that happened at the lake house. Yeah, and then it all coming to a climax in a Tarazi fighting pit, basically, where Marcus has to defeat titans and, you know, crazy people with 3 swords and stuff like that. And it's Marcus almost, by the end, Marcus's story is one of, he gets himself deeper and deeper into a mess, but even at the end, he will always say, "Where's Savanta? I hope she's okay. I hope everything's all right." And it's just, yeah, it's seeing Marcus continuing to hold strong, and then Savanta just dipping and dipping and dipping to the point where she just loses control.
Yeah, past the point of no return. And I love that with Marcus. Like, Marcus is constantly going through shit. Like, the shit just keeps escalating for Marcus. It just keeps going from bad to worse. But he still, like, holds true to his ideals. He still holds true to his values, and he still cares about Savanta, even though she's got him into that situation. And yeah,
he's the character with the most heart.
Definitely. And I'm quite shocked that an agent actually said, you know, drop this storyline, because that, like, Savanta and Marcus, along with Broska, I feel like are the heart of the Fangs of War. And yeah, because the Fangs of War is very much dominated by its despicable characters: Revik,
Yes.
Alvarez, General Farius, and which I love it for that. I absolutely love it for that, and I love that Revik especially is this massively prominent character who never seems to get his comeuppance no matter what he does, and he's just completely despicable in every single way. But you have that heart with Marcus and his relationship with Savannah. You have that heart with Broska, you know, wanting to do good by the world of Prevenci. And I'm absolutely shocked to hear that someone said drop the Marcus and Savannah storyline, because yeah, absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it was, the reasoning behind it was because Kavara is in my mind the main character.
Yeah.
And that's purely because she has the power, she has the, you know, the momentum behind her, and everything's kind of unraveling with her.
Yeah.
But the other characters, like Alvarez and Revek and Farius and Broska and Jinx and that, are all within their own little bubble over in Prevention Taraz, and they all kind of feed into each other's story in small ways, especially the governor and the general and Broska and Jinx. They're constantly bashing heads and stuff, and Ravek was also the equivalent of that, just in Taraz. And then Savanta and Marcus felt a bit, I think one of them called them superfluous, and just, you know, a not necessary storyline, which from the query notes that I gave, when I first sent the document off, they only got really like an introduction to them, and I guess they must have been confused by the fact that, okay, we've got all these characters within the actual city, then we've got these 2 scouts miles over here. What are we doing with these? But yeah, I would never drop them. No. I couldn't drop them.
I'm glad you didn't. Like you said, it's definitely Kavara's story, but a case could possibly be made for Revik as well. But yeah, I'm really glad you didn't drop the Marcus in Savanta, because whilst it is superfluous to the other character's storyline, it's telling a very important story in itself, and I have no doubt that it's all going to come together, especially Savanta and Marcus, their storyline with everyone else's story as well, especially with how Savanta's is heavily tied to the Iron Queen, and so is Kavara's as well.
That's where the sequel goes.
Brilliant.
That I'm going to try not to give spoilers. The outcome of Savanta and Marcus's story is that their next stage of the story will be that they are taken to the Iron Queen and they encounter things that they never even realized. And the Iron Queen is this, we actually get to meet her in person, and she's a devious, malicious, incredibly controlling, and she's like a cat toying with food.
Yeah.
She is always in control, and she can always kill you, but she just doesn't want to because it's fun not to. And I love that about her, and I'm really excited for people to read about who Gaza Manesk is and what the Iron Queen actually is.
That does sound awesome, because the Iron Queen is someone in Fangs of War you hear a lot about. You hear a lot about her from Kavera's story, from Savanta and Marcus's story, from Revik's story, and she's treated with this almost reverence from her followers as well. And then you do get a little bit from her from the climax of the book, but that mystery built up around her and just everything to do with her is absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to explore that. And it's going to tie into my next question, especially where we can talk about Kavara as well. Is one thing with the Fangs of War is the female characters. They're very you write them extremely well. The female characters are written extremely well. It's almost like their gender isn't relevant. I find with a lot of modern day books and a lot of media that a lot of female characters are written the way they are. They're written to be so capable and powerful because they're female, and it's sort of drummed into the reader or the viewer. This character's a female. This character's a female. Whereas, you know, with the Fangs of War, Kavara, Jinx, the Iron Queen, they're not damsels, but they also don't go into every single battle, you know, with expecting to win. They have their strengths and their capabilities, but they also have their many flaws as well. And it's just very realistic and very authentic. And I'd like to hear about your thought process for writing female characters, because I think you've done that extremely well.
It's I always set out that every single character would start from a level playing field, and they would be defined by their circumstance rather than any characteristic or anything else. I think it's ridiculous and childish if an author will then go, well, this is the female character. This female character does certain things, says certain things, does certain actions, etc. I think that's dumb. I don't get that, because you know, you're in a fantasy world and you're in that kind of environment, and yeah, a certain amount of sexism might exist, but realistically, they're gonna fight for their lives. They're gonna do every single other thing that every other character is gonna do. And I think one of the main characters that I made bloody sure that I wasn't going to put into a box was Broska, because Broska is a game man.
Yeah, that's
Broska
to mention as well.
Broska and
You
Eli.
never get that, because especially in a lot of books as well, is gay characters are often stereotyped as well. And Broska, you would never get that impression that he was a gay man. He's very much not stereotyped, and you only know he's a gay man because he mentions about his relationship with a man, but it's not something you would ever sort of get, and I love that. It's not.
I like doing it in snippets. Like the letter is addressed to Eli from Lorenzo, and you've got the little picture that he's got where it's him and Eli, and then Camilla and Davo, and then the story about how they found them and stuff like that. And there's, I like doing it that way rather than him going around with a flag saying I am the gay character. I don't want to flag post him because that just makes it. Makes it childish, and that makes it annoying.
It's not a defining trait, is it?
Yes, exactly,
and that's what I love how you handle Broska, definitely.
And that's how I wanted to treat Broska. That's how I wanted to treat the female cast. It's they are, at the end of the day, they are characters. They are characters first, who I want to tell a story with, and they are their sex, their preference, their everything else second. Because it's not a defining feature unless I want it to be, which in this case I don't.
You don't.
And in the sequel we get a lot more from Eli. And again, all that you can see from Eli is his passion and love for Broska, for Lorenzo, for his husband, and his love for his children, and his bond with Jinx, because as a sister-in-law, and that is what defines him, rather than the fact that he is a gay man. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because like I've said, a lot of gay characters, they do fit the stereotype in books, and it's sort of drilled hammered into the reader. This is a gay character, and like you said, it's not something that's very overtly stated with Broska. It's delivered in snippets. Always looking at a picture of this man that he loves, and it's handled so delicately and tenderly, and I have to commend you for that. It's very, very well written. Very impressed by how you handled that, definitely. And another thing as well is that the thing that you write so well is action scenes. You do action scenes really well, and they're very detailed. They're very choreographed, and that is like we've got the fighting pits. We've got Remick fighting villagers and monsters, and it's all very detailed, very choreographed, and it's just written so well, and it's so immersive. And one of our community members actually said that some of the fighting scenes reminded them of old samurai sort of movies as well. And just wondering, is that like an inspiration for your writing, for your action scenes, or if they are, what did inspire your action scenes? Because they're very well written.
I think the action scenes are they're mentally choreographed in my head, mainly because as I'm writing the story, it plays out as a film. And if I just put they lock swords a few times and then they drove a blade through their chest, you can do anything with that. That isn't an intense action scene. That's like a passing comment as far as violence goes. Especially if you're writing grimdark, you need to make these action scenes bloody and gross.
Yeah.
And so it is the case of, if I bring my sword up here, another person's going to come at me across, and then I have to work out where I'm going. Do I backstep? Do I sidestep? I want it to be dynamic, and I want there to be motion. And I know there's a case of show not tell, but at the same time, I want to tell you exactly how these people fight, because I want you to be immersed in how they fight, what their technique is, how they improve. Because that's a big thing that I brought for Kavara as well, is that she finishes the Fangs of War hardly knowing what to do with her, sword and whatever else. And then in the sequel, she is, we watch her go through fight scenes, and hers is choreographed, and she's doing all these bits and pieces. She's being resourceful and stuff, and I want to try and bring that out. And one of the main ways that I did that is that I sentences that don't finish properly. I'm sure you would notice that I just have a long dash, and it's just constant, because that's how action works. That's how a fight scene works.
Exactly.
And that's something I will always write. If it's an action scene that's fast paced and there's swords flying everywhere, there's no full stops. It's just moving constantly over. And That's just I want to bring a dynamism to actually describing a fight scene that I haven't seen a lot of in fantasy writing in particular.
Yeah. No, you've achieved that really well. That's one of the defining aspects of the Fangs of War for me is aside from the amazing characters and the beautiful prose, the action scenes are done very authentically, and they're written extremely well. And especially the fighting pits, I love the fighting pits, and with, like I said earlier as well, with Revik fighting the monsters that are coming from the swamps. That was
They
really
were both the hardest chapters to write. Marcus in the fighting pits and Revek fighting the massive like swamp monster. That was hands down the hardest chapters I had to write, because it was the balance between making it feel realistic, and especially for Marcus, because that's a 24-page chapter, which is quite a big chapter. But to also then not make it feel like, oh God, can they just kill each other already? I didn't want that to be a feeling. Yeah. And so it's a case of doing just enough that it feels dynamic, but not dragging it on to the point where it gets tiresome.
Yeah.
And yeah, they were definitely the hardest chapters to write.
Brilliant. You mentioned the hardest chapters to write. Who was the hardest character for you to write for?
That one came more as a learning curve, and it was General Farius.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want him to spend the entire book in Alvarez's shadow, which I was worried he would, because I took Revek away from that so that Revek could be Revek.
Yeah, definitely.
Rather than live under. And when they're reunited later in the series, Revek and Alvarez, you can see very clearly that they have become very different people. And that the reason why Revek's storyline exists at all is because these are two characters who I loved, who I wanted to separate to define them. I wanted them to be paranoid, insane people in very different ways. But Farius almost didn't have that. He was almost the old, angry, gruff general who wasn't necessarily a defined character. But I actually took a step back and said, actually, no, let's define General Farius in Alvarez's shadow, because that can be his character.
Yeah,
is that he's struggling to come out of that, and that his sheer determination to, stamp out any chance of the truth coming out that Broska's trying to get out, and just his desire to hunt and torture and do horrible things to him and Jinx. That was a defining feature of his character, is that he doesn't want to be an Alvarez's shadow. I don't want him to be an Alvarez's shadow. So let's do everything we can to bring him out of it.
Yeah, that's brilliant as well, because one of the really interesting things for me for Fangs of War was the similarities between the world of the Icebreaker Sea and their politics and our world. Like you mentioned about Farius living in Alvarez's shadow, and he doesn't want to live in Alvarez's shadow. I feel like Alvarez and Revik surround themselves with a lot of yes men, and they sort of, anyone that thinks differently or perceives things differently to them, they oust them, and they sort of push them out, and they don't want them around. They don't want anyone that thinks anything a smidgen different to how they think. They want everyone to be on the exact same level as them. And well, we see it with Broska, we see it with Kavara,
we see it with Darius
as well. Yeah. And it's a really interesting contrast with how things actually are in the real world, and with you saying about Farius living in Alvarez's shadow. Like both of them are surrounded by yes men, and
it's just Farius goes that extra step and becomes just that more intense as a character, because he's trying so hard to be a yes man.
Yeah.
I'm doing this to please the governor. I'm doing this to please the ruler, so that I can solidify my position. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the characters are driven by paranoia, especially the ones that are a bit more morally challenged, shall we say.
Yeah, I would agree. Going off of Revik, is one thing with Revik is he's very much, he believes he's destined to be this god amongst men, and that he is this all-powerful, all-knowledgeable figure amongst all these different lowly men that he considers lowly compared to him. But amongst that as well, as you see him journey north to Taraz and go through these villages and his encounters with the Forgotten One as well, is he has these brief moments of clarity where he's almost like, wow, I'm a fraud. You know, I'm not actually this really big, impressive, mystical persona that I believe I am to be. I'm actually a fraud. I'm a fake. And that's just such an interesting concept to me, because I said that you get inspiration from The Witcher, First Law, Game of Thrones, but I don't think there's any. I'm not encountered anyone like Revok in any book I've read. Like he's despicable, completely despicable, and he has these massive delusions of grandeur. But he doesn't just stick to that. He does actually have these moments of clarity. He's like, oh God, you know, I'm in over my head here. You know, maybe I'm not this guy that's going to achieve all this.
You know who
a bit pathetic. Yeah.
You know who Revok is actually based off of? The one character who I can think of in my entire time writing it, who I actually can say without a doubt was based on, you know, Revok was based on, is Arthur Shelby from Peaky Blinders.
Oh wow, that's really, that is
because
cool. Yeah.
Arthur Shelby he's a violent, slightly mental man who will go to such extremes for what he cares about, but will also serve his own interests when he needs to. And Revok is just an exaggeration and a corruption of that character to the fullest extent. And as you've rightly said, he experiences notions of grandeur and then watches it all crash down.
Yeah.
And I think the epilogue shows that probably the best. And in the sequel, in the first book, it's how much does it take to become God? And then the sequel is more how much can you salvage to not be a coward?
Yeah.
And because Revok is, well, in the little backgrounds that I drip feed into the Fangs of War, he is always defined by his cowardice, even though he is such a power-driven megalomaniac as a character. And again, that is probably his biggest insecurity, and that's why he was my favourite character to write, because I hope that conveys across the page,
Definitely.
just with how it's written.
That's the thing. Me and a lot of the other Fantasy Fellowship members that read Fangs of War were saying one of our favourite things about characters like Revok and Alvarez is whilst they're villains, is that they're so easy to root for in terms of you want to see what they're doing, they're not cartoon characters. They're not mustache twirling. They're very capable. They're very intelligent. They think a lot of what they're planning through, and and they just, me especially, when I was younger, when I was young and I used to read books like the Game of Thrones books, I used to be very much like, oh, that bastard Joffrey, you know, shaking my fist like an old man at the sky, you know. I want Robb Stark to win. I want Jon Snow to win. And I was very much kind of in that bubble where when I was younger, I wanted the good guys to win. I wanted the bad guys to get their just desserts. And as I've gotten older, I've sort of assimilated to that the villains tend to be the more interesting characters. And I've sort of a lot of time veered towards them. Whilst I certainly don't want good things to happen for them, they're the characters I want to see. And it happens obviously in the Fangs of War. The main character I was rooting for a lot of the time was Rosca and Marcus. They were the two sort of, and Kavara to an extent. But Revok, Alvarez, and Farius were sort of like these guys are bastards. Can't stand these characters. Horrible people. Can we get to the next Revok chapter, please? Can we get to the next Alvarez point of view chapter, please? Because I want to see what these guys are doing. These guys are so interesting. They're so despicable. They're so venomous, you know, but they're so interesting. What are these guys, you know, what are these guys up to? And that's one of my favourite things about the book. It's just that the villains are so interesting and they're so capable and they're not stupid. They're not foolish. And yeah, they really drive the story forward.
And that again is one of the key things that I wanted to avoid writing it is to make them bad because they make poor decisions, or make them bad because they are just because they're evil. Being evil for the sake of being evil is not worth anything. Alvarez is terrified of his own fate and demands free will, even though he doesn't know what that looks like. Revek is a megalomaniac who's also incredibly insecure. Farius is tenacious, but also at the end of the day, he just wants to be a good soldier. Good soldiers follow orders, and he does that to the absolute extreme. And yeah, that's what I wanted to draw out of them. And I will also say, for people watching this who have read the Fangs of War and are wondering what the Horns of Grief is going to look like for these characters, Revek takes as much of a role as he always has, and goes to even greater extents, dare I say that.
Yeah.
Alvarez takes more of a back step. He's still present, but he is more he's a watchful eye in the sequel. You still see his little flickers of madness, but the real character that I wanted to literally draw out of the shadow, is Farius. We see a lot more of Farius. We see him stepping into his shoes of, the nasty general who will go to any length to get what he wants and do people proud and just draw as much blood as he can, because he is an old wolf, and that's how I've always referred to him. And I think Revek is probably more of a shrew with teeth.
Yeah, the shrew. That's quite a cool comparison. I'm glad to hear you say that Revek will be playing this sort of a similar, if not bigger, role than he already did, because just is someone I love to watch and read and explore about, and hearing that Farius will get that similar treatment as well. Because I always got the impression, especially from the start of the book of Fangs of War towards maybe 3/4 of the way through, that whilst Alvarez certainly is pretty despicable, that he's maybe misguided and that he might have this good, maybe a sliver of good in him, but then obviously later on, without getting spoilers, but with a certain character, you see, well, obviously he is a piece of shit. But going off what you were saying a few minutes ago, with Revek in later installments exploring like his cowardice and whatnot. Is there potential for like a Revek redemption arc there, possibly?
There is almost one, and yeah, he nearly receives that redemption, but at the last moment, with the last straw of his being, something happens that he freaks out about, and everything goes wrong, and he knows full well that if what's happening is true, he will die at the end of it. Yeah. And so rather than redeem himself, he just goes straight through the floor into hell and just gets even worse. But yeah, I'm not sure if there is there is a character as a redemption arc, actually. But that's a character who you'll meet in the sequel, who's actually going to also be in.
We haven't met this character yet, then, who will get the redemption arc.
No.
That's very interesting, because there's one character that people from the fantasy folk do not want to get. I'm not going to say who, but there's one character that they do not want to see get a redemption arc. And I'll DM you actually after the call who it is, who they don't want to see get a redemption arc.
I know exactly what you're going to say. I know exactly what you're going to say. And no, she doesn't get one.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. I'm glad to hear that. I'm sure they'll be glad to hear that as well. So yeah, talking about the Horns of Grief, then, like, what can you give us any sort of like insight into how that's got? I know you said to me recently that once the spotlight's concluded, that you will be releasing the Horns of Grief prologue.
Well, I'm actually going to take it a step further, which I'm a bit nervous about. I'm actually going to release the prologue on the first 3 chapters.
Oh wow!
So we're going to see exactly where the characters have landed themselves, because I think it's been 2 weeks after the end of the Fangs of War is where the Horns of Grief takes off, and yeah, we get to see what's happening with Kavara and the Forgotten One and Alderbane. We get to find out where Ravek is and what his new position is and what's going on. And then we also get to find out what happens with Jinx and obviously what happened in the aftermath of the climax to the Fangs of War. But that's in the first 3 chapters. So yeah, it'll be prologue and first 3 chapters. We'll be releasing probably between the 26th and the 29th of December.
Yeah, nice one. Looking forward to that. Yeah, so talk me through the rest of the series. So obviously you can't give spoilers, but what is your planned route and target for the rest of the series in terms of numbers of books, and where the series will go in terms of it? Is it going to be mainly sequels after the Horns of Grief, or is it going to delve into spin-offs or prequels, or?
Well, the plan currently is that the main series is going to be 5 books long.
Nice.
And the Fangs of War, the Horns of Grief, and the third one are almost read as the rise and fall of everything. Yeah. And then the last 2 will be war, basically. Yeah. Imagine Battle of the 5 Armies, the Hobbit kind of deal. And that's going to be what the whole series looks like. There is going to be there will be a prequel novella. There will be short stories, and there will be a spin-off book involving a couple of characters from the main series. But that'll be set about 20 years afterwards. So yeah, there is a lot going on. I was going to say that the Horns of Grief is going to be the shorter of the 5 books, but during my edits, I've actually added about 65 pages to it. So yeah, it's turning out not to be the shortest book at all. Yeah. And that all of those books combined will make up the Blood and Steel saga as a whole. In the future, probably distant future, there are 2 more stories that I want to tell in the Icebreaker Sea world. One of them will be about a civil war that happens in the south to form the 5th nation, which I haven't really mentioned much about, other than alluding to it in Ravek's background, in that he won his medals and he won his promotions by fighting in this civil war that happened however long ago. And the other one is in an area far north, which is very much god worshipping. It's a swampland. It's probably the closest that I can. I don't know how I would refer to it. That's definitely Witcher inspired, that bit. Yeah, as far as the Fangs of War is concerned, and that series, it'll be 5 books long with a prequel, short stories, and a spin-off, and that'll be the package.
Oh, nice one! Really looking forward to that, because I've got no doubt that it's going to blow up. I've got massive hopes and expectations for the rest of this series. So no pressure.
Yeah, I hope it does well. Again, I published it back in January with almost saying, okay, it's out there. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Set up an Instagram account, just kind of funneled it out to people, and now I'm sat here with the Fantasy Fellowship having a Q&A interview, and we're doing a blog tour and book promotions. We've got a sequel coming out next year, and I don't know where it goes from here. It's as I said in our little conversation before this, disbelief has been my primary feeling throughout this year concerning book-related stuff. I didn't think I had the writing quality to be able to generate as much interest as that has been. And it's
definitely do.
yeah, it's I guess as I said, I'm in disbelief.
Yeah, you definitely do, and that's one of the something I wanted to draw upon as well. It's slightly unrelated to the Fangs of War. Is you recently released your novella, The Crescent Moon, and whilst I loved the Fangs of War, thought it was fantastic, but you do often think, with a new author, with a new book, is this sort of like is this all they're capable of? But then you've brought up The Crescent Moon, which is a completely different vibe, a completely different style to the Fangs of War, and it's just reiterated how much of a great writer and author you are. The Crescent Moon is fantastic. It's a beautiful novella, and anyone watching this at the moment, well, not at the moment, but when you do watch this, I thoroughly recommend that you check out The Crescent Moon by Ethan. It's a very short novella. It's only about 150 pages long. It's very philosophical, very beautiful prose, and it's fantastic. It really is fantastic. It'll make you think. It'll make you wonder. It'll make you ponder. And one question I do want to ask you, Ethan. I'm pretty sure that you might have answered this before elsewhere, but is the world of the Crescent Moon and the world of the Icebreaker Sea, are they linked at all?
They are entirely separate. It was I don't really know what made me choose to actually have it as almost like an Arabian inspired city on the edge of the desert and stuff. I think it was to create a world and a place that was so dramatically different than the Fangs of War, because the Crescent Moon is obviously such a dramatically different book.
Oh, massive.
And yeah, it's one of the favorite things that I've ever written. And yeah, something that I really enjoy creating, and answering a very important question.
Very important question.
And I'm hoping next year the entire trilogy will be done. So
that's going to be a trilogy, The Crescent Moon.
Yeah. The first one asks the question, what is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
The second book asks the question, what should we look for in life?
Yeah.
And then the third book answers the question, what are we?
Oh, amazing. Very profound. That's all I could think about through you sent me an arc of The Crescent Moon, and absolutely adored it. It's very profound. It does make you think, and I can't wait to explore more of that world and more of those questions. You've absolutely hit at the park with not just the Fangs of War, but the Crescent Moon itself. You've really smashed it there. Yeah, so massive congratulations to you in regards to that. Massive. Just got time for another couple of questions here. Is we have a lot of aspiring or fledgling writers within our community as well. Obviously, you've wrote an incredible incredible book in the Fangs of War. You've written an incredible novella in The Crescent Moon. Is there any advice that you would give to any aspiring or potential writers, or anyone looking to move into like the indie publishing sort of fields?
Well, I'll probably give three pieces of advice. First one is never be afraid to do it yourself. That is the one regret that I had with publishing The Fangs of War, is that I didn't do it. I didn't take that route faster because I was so afraid of doing it myself, because I didn't think it was a real book at the time. If it was self-published, it wasn't real. But I'm so glad that I've done it now, because I set my own time frame. And if you have a love for the craft, just do it. Just get it out there. Just show the world what you've written. Just show the world what you can do. Probably my second one is absolutely know your genre. Know what you like. Read around it, and you don't necessarily have to be an expert about it. When I wrote The Fangs of War, I had only read two Joe Abercrombie books, but that for me was enough to actually engage with the story like this and actually bring out a lot of those grim, dark elements and stuff. And it's true, write a book you want to read. That is definitely one. And the final piece of advice I'd probably give is stick with the people who support you most. be that readers, reviewers, friends, whoever else, because they will be the ones that pick you up when you're struggling with where the book should go or what you should do with it, what comes next, what the next book should look like, what the cover should look like, everything else. They will be your determinant, and they will make the whole process of working out where you want things to go so much easier. Because once you get your foot in the door, there will be someone out there who says, I want this, I want to read this, I want more of this. And that's just it just makes everything so much easier, makes it more enjoyable, you feel fulfilled. And as a writer who has many times experienced imposter syndrome, it also adds a bit of reality to it that keeps you grounded, rather than feeling, oh, I'm a fraud, this is ridiculous, what am I doing? Which is a conversation that my partner's had with me a couple of times. She said, Ethan, you've literally written a book, all right? Stop. People like this, people read it. So yeah, those are my 3 pieces of advice I would have said.
Amazing. Would have expected anything less from a guy who wrote The Crescent Moon, which is absolutely beautiful and profound. Yeah, that's some fantastic advice there, Ethan. I'm sure anyone watching this video who aspires to write or is currently writing, I'm sure they'll be able to get a lot of wisdom from that. So yeah, just time for the last question is obviously the whole subject here is indie writing, indie books. Which indie books or indie authors would you recommend? Which indie books out there do you love, or are you a massive fan of?
I've got a lot of books on the way that I'm going to have. Basically next year is going to be my dedicated indie year, but I have come across some absolute gems this year. And there are three notables that I'll give. The first one you had on last month, Tom Dumbrell's.
Yeah, definitely.
His writing style, it improves massively through the series.
It does, definitely.
I loved Cyrus. I loved Wendell as a character.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved Bran. No Place for Peace is actually in my top 3 books that I've read this year.
I love for Peace as well, and that's something that Tom said.
It was my absolute favourite.
Yeah, is that Tom? Go on.
There were so many twists and turns to it. There was redemption, there was cruelty, there was it was just an excellently written book. And yeah, Tom Dumbrell's definitely one up there. Another one is Mark Holloway, The Soul's Aspect and the Soul's Instruments. I had never actually read a book based around a school environment for a while. I don't know if I call it dark academia, but it was, it was very much that kind of thing, lessons, learning magic, etc. But what he did with it and how it didn't even unravel itself, it literally fountained out towards the last 100 pages, was incredible. And then the second book almost reads like a grimdark story. And so much happens that I don't expect. I don't know what comes next. Callum he's a real character. He feels so grounded and full of convincing emotion, and it's a really, really impressive book. And then the final one, which is one that I've picked up an e-arc for, is No Heart for a Thief by James A. Dunlin, who's very much a new author coming out. And at first I started reading his book, and his book is about holding spiritual magical powers in stones, and that the main character is a thief who's able to take from those stones and will the power back, and those people are shunned, and it's it's not right to be a thief, or a Malatu, I think it's called. But he stumbles across a girl, and then it gives you a lot of backstory. And at first I was confused because it kind of jumped all over the place a little bit, but then I actually realised that the book is a reflection of a character's learning curve. It's a reflection of being a better person, doing a better thing, correcting the past, denying who you are by trying to be something you're not, and realising the fallacy of that. And once I look at it from almost like a metaphorical level, it's a fantastic book. Really easy to read, really fast flowing, and yeah, if he ever approaches Fantasy Fellowship, he's got a thumbs up from me, because his first book's really, really good.
I'll look them up after this recording then, definitely. It's interesting that you say the Souls aspect as well, because Souls aspect is getting a lot of love at the moment over the Fantasy Fellowship, and it's looking very likely that Souls aspect will be the spotlight for January after Ryan Cahill. So yeah, a lot of people that have read Souls aspect have been massive fans. So I'm glad you've mentioned that. Ethan, it's been fantastic having you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this.
Pleasure to talk to. You've articulated yourself so very well, and you're, like I've brought up before, someone your age to be so artistic and knowledgeable and just write as well as you do. It's fantastic. You're like an author prodigy, a writing prodigy, and I have no doubt at all that you are going to blow up at some point, and I really don't doubt that in the slightest. And I think you've got very big things in store for you, and I can't wait to see that all unfold for you. I really can't. And you've been an absolute pleasure to talk to tonight.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to talk to you and to be a part of the Fantasy Fellowship. It's wonderful what you guys do, wonderful environment, and lovely people all involved. I hope I blow up with publicity before I blow up from stress, because this sequel is a hell of a job. But yeah, no, I do really appreciate it, and every single review or reading, or every single time someone has my book on Goodreads to read, it's it's a little, it's a warm feeling. It's nice. It's almost, yeah, it's lovely to see, and to be part of the community is wonderful, and to be, well, nearly 21 with 2 books out, and by the time I'm 22, I'll have 5 out. So
it's an amazing achievement, and it's all very well deserved. And the success, I firmly believe, is coming to you. You are an excellent author. You've written 2 excellent books, and I have no doubt that the rest of the series of the Fangs of War, the rest of the Crescent Moon, and whatever other series you have planned for the future will absolutely exceed every expectations. I genuinely believe that success is coming to you, and it's very well deserved.
Thank you very much. No, I do really appreciate that. And probably one final note from me would be, for the future plans as well, I don't just intend to stick to fantasy. Okay. There will be horror, there will be dystopia, there'll be sci-fi, there'll be all sorts. I have a lot planned, and I'm very excited to bring it out and see what the world thinks. But yes, thank you very much for this. I do really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I'm excited to see you bring all of that out. It's an exciting time to be not just a fantasy fan, but a fan of your work, Ethan. Well done. Kudos to you.
Very much.
Right. So that concludes this author Q&A. Thank you everyone for listening. Ethan, thank you very much for joining us. You've been an absolute pleasure. Everyone, if you're watching this video, you can join our community Discord, which you can see in the description below. We're also on Instagram at fantasy_fellowship, and we're also on Twitter at fantasy fellowship. We also have a website at www.fantasy-fellowship.co.uk. If you enjoyed this author Q&A, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button, comment, tell us how much you enjoyed it, tell us if you're planning to read the Fangs of War, and stay tuned, because the Fantasy Fellowship have a lot of exciting content coming up. We have a lot of exciting content that we filmed this year, and the next year, 2023, it's only going to get bigger, better, and more exciting. Thank you all for listening. Ethan, you're an absolute legend.
Thank you.
You deserve all the success in the world.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.